right, good morning. So today we are talking about issues related to businesses and startups. And more specifically, I have with me a team of professionals that are going to help us look at businesses from a 30,000 foot level and really focus on asset protection. I think a lot of times when we're starting a business, we don't always think about organizing it in a way so that it's protecting not just the business assets, but also the personal assets. And so for that reason, today I have with me two professionals in the arena of asset protection. I have first with me Aimee Hitchner, who is a lawyer at Maynard Nexsen. Did I say that right, Aimee?
You got it.
And Aimee has been practicing for many years, and her forte is in the asset protection. Aimee, if you don't mind sort of just giving us a little bit of a background in terms of what you do.
Sure. Yes. Thanks for putting this together, Bertha. This is a great opportunity to be able to share our knowledge on asset protection. So I am an attorney, again, at Maynard Nexsen. I focus my efforts on estate and business planning, which of course includes asset protection. I like to work closely with families that have closely held family businesses. I think that is a kind of a unique area where people need to think about all the different aspects of estate planning and business planning and how they work together. I think I bring something a little bit different to the table in that I've also been a business owner. And so I like to be able to share my experiences as a business owner and kind of what I've gone through and am kind of able to see things a little bit differently, kind of from the business owner's perspective, as well as from the attorney's perspective. So that's it in a nutshell.
Great. And I think I just want to add that I think having that perspective of the business owner allows lawyers to be able to talk, and I think in a more relatable way. So I think we're going to appreciate your background as a business owner. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And then we have also Thomas Pate. Thomas is a vice president at Highland Capital Brokerage, and he also comes with many years of experience. He works in the financial and insurance realms. And Thomas, do you mind sharing a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, you would have to mention the years. I've been in the business 54 years.
Wow.
I started in 1968, and I've been with Highland Capital Brokerage as a business insurance and estate planning specialist for 17 years. And prior to that, I did 20 years with E.F. Hutton, Merrill Lynch, and Morgan Stanley as an internal specialist. So the working with business owners in terms of asset protection and estate planning and tax planning, a lot of times it's the same plan that just touches all three areas.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an exciting area, and the whole idea is to work with the business owners to help them get the best economic results that they can.
Awesome. And is it typical for you to work with lawyers?
I spend probably a third of my time with lawyers and accountants and financial advisors, getting ready for the presentations to the client. The whole idea with the different advisors is to, in the trade, we call it playing nice in the sandbox, is we try to work with each other on a lot of exchange of information on a parallel basis so that we can get the best results for the client.
Yeah. Well, in my world, we don't always work together. So I really appreciate that we can come together as a team and to look at a set of facts and sort of present the best plan, if you will, for people who are looking really in that holistic asset planning realm. Just a little bit about myself. I am an employment lawyer, and I've been practicing for almost 21 years, and we primarily do litigation. So we usually, the clients that we get are usually when shit has hit the fan, if you will. So this for me is much more professionally satisfying, that I get to speak to clients on the front end and to really see how they can avoid picking up the phone and calling me, because in the long run, I think it's to their benefit to put in this infrastructure, if you will. So I'm excited to be able to speak with both of you and sort of look at this case that we have today. So that being said, I'm going to jump right into to the case study, and let me just share my screen with you all. Okay, so what we have is sort of a hypothetical situation, but I did pull this information from a client that we actually have been helping. I changed the names, obviously, for privacy reasons, but here's sort of the personal and professional information that I'll just share. Like I said, I'm not going to read it all, but I'll leave the facts up there so we can come back to them. So we have a couple, Sam, who's 59, and he is a colon cancer survivor. He's been in remission. His wife, who's almost 10 years younger than him, she's also had some health issues. They have 4 kids. They've been married for 15 years. They have quite a few assets, a home, 2 homes, a boat. They have some life insurance policies. They're both lawyers, and they have their own divorce law practice together. It's split 50-50. They have employees. They have what they believe are the right insurance policies, like the general liability, property insurance, etc. And they are in the scale mode, so they are trying to increase their business, and they also have invested in a startup business where they collectively own 34%. So those are the facts that we're working with, and I would like to turn it over to you, Aimee, if you could kind of jumpstart for us. If this were a couple that came to you, what would be the recommendations that you would give them in the realm of asset protection?
Yeah, so just looking at this case study, it's a fairly typical example of the types of clients that we have in our office regularly. Married couple with children that own a business. And so in this particular situation, it doesn't sound like the children are kind of planning to take over the business, although I guess that's a fact that we would want to find out. Sometimes children want to follow in their parents' footsteps and become lawyers. Sometimes they want to run the other direction. So, that would be something that I would want to find out. There was a lot of information gathering that takes place when we look at a situation like Sam and Libby's. The first thing that I like to do is get a good understanding of how assets are titled and review the ownership of every asset that they have. And sometimes it's a situation where we start kind of digging in and we find out, oh, I forgot, I've got this piece of vacant land out in South Florida that I just completely forgot about, or I might be inheriting property outside of the country, things like that, that maybe people forget to list in that initial questionnaire, that initial statement of facts. So digging deep and really getting our clients to open up to what it is that they have or what they may be receiving, and then also how they're titled. So that's an important piece, is kind of understanding that first. And then the second step would be to determine which of the assets are exempt from creditor collection, which have that kind of statutory exemption, legal exemption, and then which assets they own that may have exposure. And then kind of figuring out, I guess step 3 is developing that plan that would protect the assets that have exposure, and then also just recognizing the assets that are already protected and making sure that those are titled properly. So I would start kind of explaining to clients what assets are already exempt in Florida. So we live in this great state where we have a lot of built-in protection that is provided. So the first and probably most commonly known is the homestead protection, which is up to half an acre in city limits and 160 acres in an unincorporated county area. So this means you can sink as much as you want of your funds into that homestead, as long as you're within that size limit, and that is all protected from creditors. There are a couple of exceptions, the exceptions being the IRS and any taxing authorities, the mortgage company, if you have a mortgage on the property, and then anyone that does work on the property. So anybody that has an ability to put a lien on the property because of work they've done that hasn't been paid for. So that those are kind of the only real creditors that can attach to your homestead. So sometimes people are buying, bigger properties in the city that are more than an acre. If that's the case, the protection still applies. It's just allocated pro rata to the total property value. So we look at kind of the whole piece and just give them credit for that half acre. So that's the biggest and kind of most important one. It seems like every client I have owns a home. And so we start there, like that's your best piece of protection. The next ones are some that maybe people don't always know about. So wages for the head of household are protected. Annuities are protected asset. The cash value to life insurance policies would be protected. Retirement accounts, including IRAs and 401ks, are protected. And so another bucket to consider putting assets into is kind of maxing out your retirement accounts, making sure you've got good life insurance policies, which I'm sure Thomas is going to talk about in a bit. So I'm not going to dig too far into that stuff. And then we get into other things, disability income. So possibly if Libby or Sam were to be in a situation where one of their health issues turns into something that causes a true disability where they're receiving disability income, that would be protected. Up to $1,000 in a vehicle is protected. I don't even know how great of a protection that is, but it's there. Same thing with personal property. So you might have, some jewelry or something that applies. Prepaid college plans. So if they have 4 children and the 4 children are not in college yet, then setting up prepaid plans for them. Again, I'm sure Thomas will talk about this a little bit, but also being able to set up prepaid college plans for grandchildren. So if they have grandchildren or if they're in the near future, that's also a bucket to consider filling. Health savings accounts and unemployment, and then some Social Security is also protected. So, but then I want to kind of jump back. There are a couple other ways to consider assets being protected, and that is related to titling. So tenants by the entirety property is unique to married couples in the state of Florida. So if we have assets that are titled as tenants by the entirety, that is protected as long as there's a judgment just against one spouse. So if one spouse is sued for a bad act or a car accident or something where they're solely liable, the tenants by the entirety property would be protected. So if we have a joint bank account that's set up as tenants by the entirety, that is not accessible by creditors. If they are both at fault, then it's exposed. So then that's kind of like a quasi-exposed asset where we look at what are the risks of having tenants by the entirety accounts as kind of your whole method of asset protection. And then another way to title assets would be creating multi-member LLCs with properly drafted operating agreements that would also protect the assets of the LLC to be limited only to a charging order, so that only distributions that are transferred out of that LLC would be exposed to creditors. So depending on the lifestyle of the people that own the LLC, there could be a situation where distributions cease entirely and the creditors are kind of left just hanging out there waiting for some point to turn the distributions back on. So that's kind of an overview of the exempt assets that we have available to us just by law in Florida. Pretty comprehensive. And so from there, we kind of look at, okay, well, Sam and Libby have a lot of different things to look at. They've got their business and then the one that they're invested in. It sounds like the startup business, I'm not sure if it's an LLC or not, but if it is, I would make sure it's a multi-member. We would want to review the operating agreement, make sure it's got proper language in there to protect them. They could consider owning their interests, kind of combining that 34% and possibly owning that interest as tenants by the entirety, or they could keep it as their own separate, their assets, as long as they're multi-member LLC. That's a good one to be in. So checking and making sure that the operational paperwork is correct. And I know, Bertha, you'll talk about the other important requirements and documentation for that business. And then similarly with their law practice, I think that, again, that we would want to look at the operating agreement there. They sounds like they're in a good position being an S corp, although, looking at their financials would be important. From a planning perspective for us, kind of knowing what the values of all of these assets are is very important. We want to kind of find out if there is any estate tax exposure. So oftentimes people come to me and they're like, Aimee, I really need asset protection. And so once we dig a little bit deeper, it's like, well, what do you mean by asset protection? And so, some of it is we're protecting it from creditors, but then also people are concerned about, well, how do I minimize exposure to taxes? And so we would want to kind of take a good consideration of what each asset is worth. And I'm sure Thomas will talk about this also, business valuations and understanding what the marketability is of the companies and what they're worth, and then kind of figuring out, do we have a taxable estate or not? So I think I've kind of given a decent overview. I'm not sure if I need to dig deeper or not, but I think maybe if we are going to each speak a little bit on this, then if I need to jump back in, I'd be happy to.
Okay. I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to be mindful of our time and just ask one that really was shouting while you were speaking, is that, so for individuals like this, does it matter if they come to you before they start? I mean, ideally, not everyone can. Or is it okay if they've already, this train has left the tracks and they need to kind of take a step back? Does it impact your advice to them?
Well, it depends. So if they come to me and they've already got things in place, we work with them where they are, and that's usually not an issue. Certainly the best case scenario is they come at the beginning and nothing's been set up. They work with attorneys and advisors in order to kind of set up their law practice or invest in a business. I mean, that is the best practice, but it's not always feasible. And a lot of times people are starting up a business and they're like, well, it's really not worth anything. Why do I need a lawyer? I mean, when they come to me later, I'm like, well, you did, because now you do. Right. But it's hard to explain that when people are getting started. But one thing to consider is that in an asset protection world, if that's what you're thinking and an act has taken place that may be, or of a lawsuit that's coming, we then have to be, I need to be made aware of that as your attorney. And then we do have to be careful to make sure that anything that's being done is not at risk for a fraudulent conveyance. Because if we have a fraudulent conveyance where we're intentionally hiding assets from creditors that are known or reasonably known, that could be clawed back in and still be available to creditors. So we can't always fix everything. The exception usually is homestead. So typically if something's happening, we can still consider paying off a mortgage or getting more assets into the homestead, maybe buying a bigger homestead. That is what we see where people come to the state of Florida and buy massive overpriced homes that they're sinking their funds into so that they're protected.
Gotcha. Okay. So preventative, being proactive is the best practice, but that's not going to hinder what you can do in terms of giving advice. That's right.
Yeah, I would say that, yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Thomas, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Just to piggyback on what Aimee shared with us, just like, to hear your recommendations and suggestions for this couple.
Oh, thank you, Bertha. I had a little bit more detailed information with this situation. So the things that jumped off the page at me is we start out with the clients who have health problems. So we do not know what their current insurability is, but they do have some life insurance in force, some term insurance. So the first thing we need to do is to review that to see how long, where they are in that term, and is it still convertible? And if it is, what opportunity do we have there to be able to keep it in force for the period of time that they want to? The second thing that I was looking at is the idea of from a tax point of view and an asset protection point of view, they did have a 401k plan. But based on the size of the plan, it appears that they're not putting away as much money as they could. And one of the things that we would want to get up for discussion in there is maximizing the amount of money that's put away in the retirement plan. Just to give you an idea of how big the pot of money can be, that's pre-tax asset protected would be at their age, each one of them could have up to $3 million in a cash balance plan. Obviously, that may be funding that might be bigger than they could afford to do with the existing cash flow that they have, but the window for putting away pre-tax money is huge. And in that case, they might like that as part of their strategy. Aimee mentioned the idea that the health savings account. I would, my comment on that would be that is absolutely the best way, but that's the best idea that our regulators have ever, or lawmakers have ever come up with, because it's tax deductible, it accumulates tax-free, and it's tax-free when we use the money. So we never pay any income tax on that money. Only bad thing about a health savings account is just not big enough. It just needs to be bigger. And so for the husband, he's got five and maybe 6 years that he can put away on almost $8,000 pre-tax. And of course, the wife has 15 more years. So we definitely want to make them aware of how much pre-tax money can be put away in that respect. The other thing that you gave us to work with was the idea of one of their problems that they had with their employees is they wanted employee retention. They were having turnover. And so the easiest thing to do with a mature law practice like this, they're going to have retained earnings. And one of the things that they could do as a retention tool is put in place split dollar plans for the employees. And this can be done literally at no cost because they've already got the money in the practice. They've already earned the money. They using a high cash value life insurance policy, keeping the cash in the practice on the books with no expenses, and endorsing the death benefit to the employee's family at a small tax cost for the employee that is going to be available to them as long as they're employees at the practice. If the employee leaves somewhere down the road, 5, 10, 15 years out, then the business hasn't lost anything because they've retained all the cash all the way through. But for the employee's family, if that employee happens to be one that dies while they're employed, it's a huge benefit. And as an add-on to that, for people that you're really trying to keep in place or lock in, an add-on to that, here again, at no cost, would be using a DBO plan, death benefit only plan. So that is an income-based benefit. So it may take the form of 2 years of salary paid to the employee's family if they died while they were employed. It looks like a retirement benefit, but it's based on the employee dying. And of course, it's insured as long as the employee is healthy. And here again, the cash stays on the books of the firm, and there's no expense. No because the cash value equals the premiums. So there's no net cost to that. The last issue that I would take a look at, and this fits into the type of trust planning that Aimee would be doing. There's a technique that we typically recommend in the husband and wife situation where they are planning to stay married. This is one of those deals where, as long as you've got a couple that are working together and are going to stay married, then this idea of doing a SLAT, a spousal lifetime access trust, where the husband has a trust for the wife, wife has a trust for the husband, and they're able to make them, through the attorney crafting the language so that they are just dissimilar enough so that they qualify, then it gives you the best of all worlds, because there's no income tax on the money properly funded in there with using the insurance-based plan as the investment in the SLAT. There's no income tax and no estate tax, and it's asset protected, which is getting us back to the things that we're trying to do: pay less income tax, eliminate the estate tax, and also make it asset protected. Those were the things that jumped off the page at me, and obviously once we get into the actual details with the family, then we may find some other things.
So if I understand then, Thomas, you're basically saying what Aimee is that there's a lot of fact finding that goes on in the front end to understand what they have, what their goals are, presumably, long term, and then being able to plug in based on their goals and what you see from the fact finding part, what would be the best path for them in terms of protecting their assets, but also, to both of your points, saving money, from a tax perspective.
Correct. Yeah, and a lot of decisions are made based on economic considerations. Some of them are tax driven, and some of them are asset protection driven. But we don't know that until we get the input from the clients on what they're really trying to do. I can give you an example. Recently, I had a couple in which I thought that they were deeply in love and going to live happily ever after. When I got to the point where the lawyer was explaining the SLAT strategy, the 50-50 arrangement with the husband and the wife, and life was going to be good, then all of a sudden the husband said, "No way, this is not happening." When it wound up, his wife liked to shop, and he was literally 100% in control of all the assets. And the idea that he was going to give up some level of control on half of his stuff, obviously that strategy didn't work. It's not a strategy we use for everybody. The divorce rate is 50%. Half of the people are going to get divorced. We know that to start with, but at the same time, the SLAT would be the least of their problems when they have a divorce.
Right.
So if in doubt, do it. It's great for economics. It's great for tax planning. And down the road, if you get a divorce, you just have to deal with it.
Gotcha. And then, sorry, one last question. You and Aimee, how do you all work as your two areas during this whole process? Do you start typically? How does that work?
Well, it's different in each situation, because one of the things that happens is we don't do legal work. We do financial planning. And it depends on what the client authorizes, because obviously the client authorizes a certain amount of legal work to be done. In the meantime, we're more in an advisory capacity on that, in terms of we've got the same information and we're offering suggestions on how to implement it and how to get the best economic results. But a lot of times we're at the mercy of how much planning the client authorizes the law firm to do. Am I on the right track there? Is that answering your question?
It is.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree exactly with that kind of, but from the opposite perspective, right? The best case scenario for me is, if the client comes to us from Thomas, so Thomas is like, hey, Aimee, I've got a client who doesn't have any planning. They've got a lot of, like, if it was the Sam and Libby clients, and he was kind of doing the case study, and we were able to kind of jump in on it together. That's a great scenario where we can come up with a plan to present kind of jointly to the client to say, look, this is what we can do for you. I can take care of the drafting of the documents that are going to work with the products that Thomas has to offer. So we work very closely kind of with mutual clients. And then for us, when we get to the back end of kind of executing documents, we have a follow-up meeting. I refer to it as a funding meeting, but it's really just a follow-up to make sure everybody's doing their homework. So Thomas would be included on that funding meeting, as well as sometimes the CPA. And we talk through retitling of assets. We make sure beneficiary designations are updated properly and kind of go through that process. Like, what is Thomas going to handle? What's the client going to handle? Does the CPA need to do anything? Is our firm doing something? Are we drafting deeds? That type of stuff. So we try to make it very clear to our clients that you've got a team of advisors around you, and we're all working together to make sure that your wishes are being accomplished and that your goals are being met.
Perfect. Yeah, and actually, I just to pivot over to the last piece, which is my piece. I want to just share that that's initially why Thomas and I connected, was because I work in a very separate silo, in litigation, where we're just putting out fires. And I'm trying to pivot my practice to be more proactive and preventative, and working with professionals like the both of you is really something that I want to start communicating to our clients, to say, this is a holistic plan. So it's not just one perspective. It's not just the employment lawyer's perspective, which is important, but also the other professionals, the financial planning, the attorney that does the asset protections. And so this is my messaging that I'm trying to communicate to our clients. And so that being said, when I looked at, when they first came to me, to be honest, I don't ever talk in terms of this is how to protect your assets personally, because that's not typically the angle that we come from, but more so it's, if you get sued, because that's the world we live in, is they call us when they have gotten sued, but what are the things that you can put in place to prevent getting hit with a judgment of $200,000 or $300,000, or worse, which is where the rub comes with me, is having to pay us, $250,000 to litigate a case when you would have invested $10,000 on the front end to put in some of the infrastructure. Then you wouldn't necessarily have these worries that you are now. So the first thing that I take a look at now, having talked to Thomas and met you, Aimee, is how do we protect the personal assets? Because there are, in the employment world, there is a law that does expose business owners to personal liability. As an example, the FLSA, that's the law that governs how business owners pay their employees. And so what a lot of our clients don't appreciate is that if they are making decisions or involved in the payment of the wage, and there's other tests that I won't really go into, but they could be sued, and it has happened. Aimee, you may have had some experience with this as well, is that they will be sued personally, not just the business itself, but they also will get sued. And if, worst case scenario, there's a judgment or something comes of that lawsuit, it can expose their personal assets. Now, where I stop, and then I think, Aimee, where you pick up, is what can they come after? Because that's admittedly outside of my realm, but that's why I appreciate you sharing in the front end. What are some things that can be exempt and not exposed to lawsuits? So that's the first thing. The second thing, I agree with both of you. The couple's age is a little bit of a concern for me in the sense that when we're helping our clients set up their businesses and they're younger or they're, just now starting, we don't really talk about an exit plan at that point. But, because this couple is getting to retirement age or actually thinking about what am I going to do when, I'm not working anymore? One of the things that we try to really emphasize, and again, I'm just talking more so in the narrow aspect of the HR, but how does your HR plan look? How does your infrastructure look? Because if part of your plan is to sell this or to merge, it's less likely that anyone will want to connect with a business that doesn't have a strong foundation, that has leaks, that has liability, that has risks. So that's something that I am now speaking to them about. And again, just in terms of putting together their HR, because from our perspective, the expense, the HR expense is typically 60% of their business. So if it's that big of an expense, then they should really invest to make sure that it's solid. And then lastly, the piece that I connected with them initially on was the investment. So they shared with me that there was a startup that approached them and they did give it investment. And so they're involved on a high level, but one of the things that they did not have in place, which I recommended, was to get D&O insurance, because they weren't aware of the practices of that startup, nor will they ever be in the weeds of the practice of the startup business. And so I was concerned with them in terms of how are they protected if there is some liability. And again, it may not reach to the level of impacting the investors, but what protections do they have? So, we looked at, getting them, making sure that the company itself had D&O insurance, but also I looked at their agreements and their agreements weren't that favorable to them. And, we were able to kind of do some negotiations to make it more balanced. But that was the other piece that really concerned me, because when they gave that money to invest in the company, I don't think they really realized that it's not just an investment. Now they're exposing themselves to, liabilities of this unknown, business. And so those are the three things, again, from my, my little realm of the employment that I would look at. But certainly, as I shared, those are pieces that now I know to lean on, for insurance pieces with Thomas, or even, the estate planning and the exemption and all of that. And so all that being said, I'm certainly now going to include as part of my team, both of your professionalism to make sure that when a client comes to me, that they can kind of look at it holistically and say, all right, this is really what I think I need to do, but how does all of that look? And so, so I appreciate both of you sharing. Was there anything that you guys kind of wanted to just throw in, just to kind of sort of close the loop in terms of everything that we've been discussing?
One thing that I would mention is if a business did engage the three of us in order to work with them, our experience level would be roughly 100 years of experience. If
True.
they put us together at the table,
True.
we can bring them 100 years collectively of experience, and in a lot of cases save them a lot of time and money, because we've been through so much of it before. It's kind of like been there, done that, seen that before, know how to fix it. This is the message that we wanted to deliver to the new business or the mature business, that we have the experience level to be able to deal with whatever situation they have. Right.
Nicely said. Yeah. Thank you, Thomas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I second that.
Yeah, agreed. And I think, I know that they will be in good hands, whoever they start with in terms of, whatever route they decide is the most pressing at the moment. But I'm going to put in, at the end of this video, I'm going to put all of our contact information so that they have our phone numbers, our websites, as well as our emails, if you guys are comfortable sharing that publicly. And so that if anybody is interested in getting started the asset protection plan, either one of us can help jumpstart that and lead them on the right path.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you both. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your expertise. And more importantly, I appreciate you willing to come and share your analysis, which has, a lot of great value. And I think people hearing this will also get to appreciate, some of the things that they should start thinking about. So thank you both. I enjoyed the chat, and I'm looking forward to working with you both in the future.